Now yesterday, the day before filming, we put it to you, our viewers, to send in your questions about this new car. And I gotta say, the response was overwhelmingly positive. And today, in this review of the Hyundai Venue with the iMT gearbox, I'm gonna try and answer as many of those questions as I can. And after you're done watching this video, if you have any more questions, why not leave them down in the comments? And give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon if you want to stay regularly updated with the best auto content. Now let's get to answering those queries. Let's start with Rajat, who wants to know what happens if you put it into first gear without pressing the brake. Well, to answer that, I'm going to first have to tell you what it's like to start the Venue iMT. It's not quite like an automatic, nor is it quite like a manual. It is like the gearbox itself, something in between. So for a start, there's no clutch pedal, so you have to leave it in neutral to start it. Put your foot on the brake and press the starter button. There we go. Now to answer the question, can you put it into first without pressing the brake? So for that, make sure the handbrake is down. I'm going to leave it in neutral. Take my foot off the brake. Put it into first. And we are away. Deepak is asking, does it have a creep function? Yes, it most certainly does have a creep function. Right now, my right leg is off the pedals, I'm in first gear and it is rolling along just as if you would have put a manual car in first gear and let it do its thing. When you start out, you're not used to having no clutch pedal, so your left leg does feel like it has to move around a little bit. But once you get used to that, when you're driving with just two pedals, you think you're driving an automatic, so you forget to shift sometimes. So it's a little bit of confusion from both sides of the pond. Harsh asks a very simple but quite frankly very pertinent question. How does it work? Now to explain to you how it works, I need to sort of put it into context with an AMT gearbox, because this is sort of halfway between an AMT and a manual. An AMT gearbox is essentially a manual, except for the fact that there are actuators doing the work for you that are controlled by software. And there's one set of actuators that operate the clutch in an AMT and another set of actuators that operate the gear shift. The difference with the iMT is that the actuators are only to operate the clutch, because you have to operate the gear shift manually yourself. So just imagine there's a little robot inside your gearbox somewhere, and its little brain in an AMT is trying to process which gear you need to be in and how to release the clutch. However, in this one, it only has to figure out how to release the clutch, so it's a lot less work for it to do. And its little brain tells the actuators when and how much to release the clutch, how much to slip it, and it does that bit for you. So now you're probably wondering, how does it know when you want to make a shift? Well, the simple fact is, the moment you take the gear lever out of its gate, say from second to third like I've just done, it realizes and adjusts, and it does it very, very smoothly. I'm really impressed by how seamless the process is. Vishal is asking, is that gear lever an electronic unit which sends a signal to a computer for gear selection? What I think he means is it shift by wire? No, this is not a shift by wire system. This is very much a mechanical manual gearbox. It's just that the clutch is activated by actuators and sensors. So yes, while the clutch action is technically by wire, the shifts themselves are all you. Adit has a very interesting question. In which gear should we park? In neutral, or is it fine if we engage first gear? Yes, as you would with a manual gearbox, the iMT can be parked in first gear. Akshay wants to know, how will it perform under sudden braking? Will it keep the engine running or will it stall? Honestly, no, I don't think you can stall it. I've tried really hard to trick it into stalling, but I just don't think it can happen. One way to do it is to put it in a gear higher than it needs to be in, but what happens then is it immediately tells you to shift down. So right now I'm in 5th gear, let's even try 6th, and I'm in very, very low RPMs, just under 1000. I'm only doing 40, but as we coast up to the signal, you will see that it protests quite vigorously. There it goes, saying please shift down. Now you notice it has not stalled. the engine is still running. It's in 6th gear. I'm at a halt and it says please shift down because it knows that the moment I try to move off again, it won't be able to do it. So sorry about that, didn't want to put you under so much stress, but yeah, you can't stall it. Sharad wants to know, can we start it in a higher gear? So no, you can't start it in too higher gear like 4th or 5th, but if you put it in 2nd from a standstill, it will roll off with very little protest, at least as long as you're on a flat surface. Sandeep wants to know, how does the auto clutch and gear work while you try to move in an uphill condition from idle? Well, let me just wait for a clear safe patch and make sure no one's behind me. On a slope, pop it into 1st gear, touch the brakes, come to a complete halt. It's holding. Lift off the brake and it held. Didn't have to use the handbrake, just tapped on the accelerator and we were on the move again.
However, you should note that this top spec Venue iMT SXO variant does get hill assist control, so that would likely have helped with the hill start.
Mahesh has a question, can we change gears from maybe 5th to 3rd or 4th to 2nd, not in an orderly manner? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's try and go from 4th to 2nd. No problem. It matches the revs, it gets you exactly where you need to be. How about 2nd to 5th? Not an issue. It figures it out for you. Dr. Anil asks, how do you manipulate the car through a waterlogged area like you would in a manual where you have to slip the clutch? No, in the event of driving through standing water, which we do not recommend in any case, you cannot modulate the clutch because of course there is no clutch pedal. In that sense, it works more like an automatic in that you just have to put it in 1 gear, give it some throttle and go for it. Rathod wants to know, do all those red accents really look that good?
Well, whether they look good or not is up to you, but they actually have nothing to do with the iMT gearbox. These are part of Hyundai's new Sport package offered on the higher trims of the Venue, irrespective of the engine and gearbox. What you get are red accents all over the car, including the roof rails, and red brake calipers. Inside you'll find new fabric upholstery with red piping, red accents on the dashboard, and the flat bottom butterfly steering wheel from the Creta with stitching finished in, you guessed it, red. Other than that, it's the same well-equipped, well-finished, albeit not super spacious, Venue interior that you know so well.
And here we have Ritik, a real petrol head at heart. He wants to know how it will cope when he's thrashing the car around some corners and needs to change up and down quickly.
Now by this I assume he means really pushing the engine and using the entire power band, so let's see what that's like.
Okay, so let's get it up as close to its red line as we can. And yeah, it shifts pretty well. You need to practice your timing, and okay, it's not quite as smooth as a perfectly executed manual shift with a good manual gearbox, but it's pretty impressive that it can shift quite well at high revs.
You also have to bear in mind that without a clutch pedal, you don't get the same thrill of executing a perfect shift. And moreover, you can't launch it hard from a standstill either.
Ayush asks, is it possible to change gear when the accelerator pedal is buried to the ground?
Let's give it a try, shall we?
Foot's in, not lifting off. And yes, you can shift while the accelerator pedal is flat to the floor. That's really amazing, but we have to say that there is a little bit of a jerk and a hesitation when you do that. So as a result, you'd rather not, and you find yourself lifting off just because it's so much smoother. Rudra wants to know, how fast is it? Can you please do a 0 to 100 acceleration timing?
Put against our testing equipment, 0 to 100 kph took 13.47 seconds, and that's a full 2.23 seconds slower than the manual and 1.57 seconds slower than the DCT with the same engine. Worth noting, however, is that while the Venue iMT we're testing is a BS6 car, the other two were BS4. The reason for the differences is that the iMT sensors and software are designed to preserve the clutch, so no matter how hard you try, you cannot do a hard launch from a standstill. Naturally, the iMT is a lot closer to the manual at in-gear or rolling acceleration from 20 to 80 in 3rd and 40 to 100 in 4th, as they function the same way when you don't have to shift the gears. But the DCT is significantly quicker by around 5 seconds. thanks to, of course, the automatic kickdown.
Vidun asks, some drivers have a habit of driving a car by keeping one hand on the gear knob always. In this case, what will happen to the iMT? Will the clutch engage? That's an interesting question because merely resting your arm on the gear lever is not enough to tell it that you want to shift. You have to really give it some heft for it to know that you want to change gears. Ishan 200 coming at us with India's favorite question, Kitna deti hai? The fuel economy, well, like a manual gearbox, is entirely dependent on the driver. You see, because you are in full control of the throttle pedal and the gear shifts, you can control how much fuel you consume. If you shift early, you'll consume less. It's as simple as that. However, I do have to say, there's a slight caveat. Because this gearbox makes you forget you're driving a manual at the end of the day, you do tend to leave it in, say, second gear and forget about it. The car will keep going, and in that sense, it is effectively an automatic at low speeds, as long as you don't get into the higher gears. But the trouble is, if you leave it only in second gear, yes, you will end up consuming a whole lot more fuel than you bargained for. Shivin wants to know, are there any additional service requirements compared to a manual?
By and large, no, there shouldn't be. The good thing about the iMT is that it's not a complex system, so there isn't really that much more hardware involved than you'll find in a manual. Most services should cost the same as the 3-pedal version, with perhaps a few additional wear and tear components needing to be replaced later on in the car's life.
Riansh wants to know, what are the disadvantages of an iMT? Well, after driving it for a bit, I suppose the disadvantages of the iMT are that it doesn't give you quite the same level of control as a normal manual gearbox would. You would like to sometimes modulate the revs, and you could shift a lot quicker if you had control of the clutch by yourself. Yes, at times you are sort of dampened by the response time of the sensors and the actuators that activate the clutch, and that's usually when you're shifting hard and fast in extreme high performance situations. So really, this is a car that prefers to be driven at a more leisurely pace, and that's when it's at its best. Like I said earlier, you can shift with the accelerator pedal depressed, but you don't really want to do that because it's really not smooth that way.
But not having a clutch pedal has other disadvantages too.
For instance, if you're in a low grip situation like sand or slush or mud, you want to slip the clutch to help you get out of there, and that's something you just cannot do in this car, obviously. But then again, that's a problem that plagues an automatic gearbox as well. At absolutely crawling speeds with just the slightest bit of throttle input, it can get a little bit jerky as the system tries to figure out how much clutch slip to allow for. But the moment you accelerate properly, it gets into its stride and it's no problem at all. Milind is asking, is the iMT available with the diesel engine as well?
No, it's not. At least not right now. But who knows, maybe if it becomes popular, you'll start seeing it offered with more and more engines. For now though, you can only have the iMT with the Venue's 1-litre turbo petrol engine, which can also be had with a regular 6-speed manual or a 7-speed dual clutch auto. And speaking of which,
and here we have Glenn with the big question, is it worth buying over the manual and DCT transmissions? And that's the big question, isn't it? Because you might be wondering, just like I did when I first got into this car, that is this really the answer to a question that nobody asked? Is there really a need for an iMT when we already have a manual gearbox and so many good automatics? In fact, the Venue with this engine comes with one of the best automatics around. It's a DCT. It's quite advanced.
the price certainly plays a big part. We can't pinpoint the exact number, but going by the variants, the DCT Auto costs somewhere between 50,000 and 1,10,000 rupees more than the manual, while the iMT costs only 15,000 rupees more than the manual. For that small premium, the convenience you get, especially in slow traffic, is immense.
Now, I'm not about to tell you that this can replicate the ultimate convenience of a proper automatic, nor am I going to tell you that it can replicate the complete control you get from a proper manual. But as a middle ground, at a price that's not too much higher, it's a great mix of the two. And I think there might be quite a few buyers that are keen on something like this.
And for those buyers, the iMT will truly be the best of both worlds. While for others, it might be a case of neither here nor there. and they might prefer instead to choose the purity of a proper manual or pay extra for the full automatic experience. Will this intriguing new iMT tech be a hit or a miss? Only time will tell. But what do you think of iMT gearboxes? Are they the future or just a fad? Let us know down in the comments. Thanks for watching.